Ha sat across from the pile of bills stacked high on the table, his trembling hands massaging his forehead. The dim glow from the desk lamp was the only source of light in the room, casting long shadows across the space, much like the growing darkness of dread in his mind. Once, Ha had been a figure of admiration, a young entrepreneur with thriving businesses, a beautiful wife, and a luxurious lifestyle. His name was frequently mentioned in conversations among high-profile clients and ambitious business partners. But that was 2 years ago. Now, debt collectors circled him like vultures, and his dreams of success slipped further and further out of reach. A series of disastrous investments had set the collapse in motion. Drawn to high-risk projects promising enormous returns, he had lost everything. Attempts to recover only drained his savings, leaving him with one last desperate bid to keep his final company afloat, but that, too, had failed. Then came gambling, initially a distraction from the mounting stress, but gradually turning into an addiction, dragging him deeper into a pit of debt. Sitting in the darkened room, an overwhelming emptiness gripped his heart. He had reached the end of the road. His reputation lay in ruins, and his pride wouldn't let him ask for help from family or friends. He had always been the one others looked up to, the man who seemed to have it all. Admitting defeat was unthinkable. Ha knew he needed a solution, but his options were severely limited. He couldn't let go of his luxurious lifestyle. It was the last remnant of his former glory. As he glanced around the opulent house, every piece of furniture a testament to his past success, a bitter taste rose in his throat. Was he truly ready to lose all of this? Then a thought, grim and desperate, crept into his mind. Unthinkable at first, but increasingly plausible under the mounting pressure. He had noticed how some of his wealthy acquaintances looked at his wife, Lon. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with a grace that drew admiration wherever she went. On more than one occasion, he had felt pangs of jealousy, aware of the lingering gazes of his friends on her. Knowing about his financial woes, a few had even made subtle suggestions, hinting at a way out. Initially, the idea made him nauseous, but as the pressure built, it no longer seemed so abhorrent. Instead, it felt like a necessary sacrifice. Han knew this was his last chance. The alternative was to lose everything: his home, his reputation, and the life he had built. Convincing Lon, however, was another matter entirely. She was the ideal wife, loyal, kind, intelligent, and stunningly beautiful. She had stood by him through every high and low of his career, even when he was too consumed by work to give her the attention she deserved. But she would never agree to this, or so he thought, unless he could frame it as an act of love, a temporary sacrifice for the greater good of their marriage. That evening, as Lon sat in their bedroom reading, Howe entered with a strained expression, his features etched with anxiety. She looked up, her brows furrowed in concern. She had noticed him growing increasingly distant, and despite her repeated attempts to ask what was wrong, he had always deflected with vague reassurances. Just tell me," she said gently, setting her book aside. "What's going on?" He took a deep breath, the words weighing heavily on his tongue. "Lon, we're in serious trouble." Her eyes widened, a flicker of alarm crossing her face. "What do you mean?" "I made bad decisions, business decisions," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. "And now we're drowning in debt. I've tried everything, but there's no way out unless we take drastic action." Lan's heart sank. She could see the shame in his posture, the way he slumped, his hands fidgeting restlessly. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll get through this, Ha. I'm here with you, no matter what." Guilt washed over him as her words sank in. She had always been steadfast, unwavering in her support, but this time, her loyalty would require a sacrifice he wasn't sure she could make. "There's one way," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "but it's not something we would normally consider. It would mean you hosting a few men. I know some wealthy people, men, who are willing to pay to have you by their side." "There's a way," Ha said slowly, carefully choosing his words, "but it's not like anything we've ever done. It would require you to host a few men. I know some wealthy men who they're willing to pay to have you by their side." Lon froze, her hands stopping midair, as if unable to process what she had just heard. She turned away, shutting her eyes tightly, as though trying to erase the words from her mind. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the steady sound of rain tapping against the window, a somber reminder of the pain engulfing the room. I can't believe this. Lon finally spoke, her voice soft but laden with anguish. Do you love me so little that you could even think of this? Do you even know who I am? I'm your wife, not something to be bartered with anyone. Ha didn't respond immediately. His gaze dropped, and the guilt in his chest surged like a wave. He hadn't wanted to say those words, but desperation had blinded him to all other options. I don't want to do this, Lon, he murmured, but we're at the edge of a cliff. There's no other way to save everything. I need you to understand that. Lon turned back to look at him, her eyes brimming with tears, though she didn't let them fall. She had cried too much in the past months, watching everything crumble, witnessing him sink into a mire of debt with no way to help him rise. She said, her voice trembling but resolute. What do you think I would do? I can sacrifice myself, but you can't ask me to sacrifice my dignity for you. You can't do that to me. Her words struck Ha like a slap to the face. He felt a cold chill rise within his chest, and what he had taken for granted suddenly became a bottomless void. He looked at his wife, standing there, hurt and desperate, and he knew he had crossed a line he could never uncross. You're right. I shouldn't have asked that of you, Ha said, his voice low, filled with regret. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking about you. The two of them stood in silence, as though time had stopped. The night outside the window stretched on before Lon finally spoke again. We have to find another way. We can sell what we don't need, cut down on expenses, and start over. But I can't do this. I just can't. Ha looked into his wife's eyes and realized how far he had drifted from her, how far he had strayed from the values that had once bound them together. He had dragged them both into the mire of his poor decisions, and now he couldn't drag Lon into it any further. I understand, Ha sighed, his voice nearly lifeless. We'll find another way. I'll work harder, do everything I can to pay off the debt. I don't want to lose you, Lon. I don't want us to lose each other. Lon stepped closer, gently placing her hand on his shoulder. Then we'll rebuild together. I believe in you, but only if you can hold on to your dignity and ours. We won't lose each other. Remember that. I held her hand, feeling a faint light break through the darkness within him. Though the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, he knew at least they could walk it together. He had no choice but to rise and fight for their future, his and hers. He wouldn't let one terrible mistake destroy everything they had built. The following weeks passed with difficulty and challenges. Ha and Lon, though facing daily financial worries and the strain on their relationship, learned to stand firm together. Sleepless nights, calls from debt collection agencies, and failed meetings with business partners wore them down, but also brought them closer. They began finding peace in the simplest of things. One morning, after waking early to discuss business plans, Ha looked at Lon. She was still weary from the pressures of life, but there was a faint sparkle in her eyes. Lon, Ha began, his voice low. I can't ask you to bear this burden anymore. I know you've sacrificed so much, and I've realized that nothing is more important than the love and respect we have for each other. Lon looked at him, a faint smile crossing her lips. I don't want to do this alone, Ha, but I also don't want to see you drown in despair. We'll start over, you know? She squeezed his hand tightly, feeling his strength return in the grip of his fingers. Ha looked at his wife with gratitude. Despite the hardship, Lon had never abandoned him. She still believed in him, and that gave Ha the drive to rise again. They began with small decisions. They sold off unnecessary assets. The luxurious car, the collection of precious antiques Ha had cherished for years, and even the expensive paintings they once bought to decorate their home. These items, though valuable, couldn't compare to the life they were trying to rebuild. The money from selling those possessions helped them pay off their debts bit by bit. Every day, they still received calls from financial agencies, but instead of feeling threatened, they began facing them with greater composure. Ha returned to his business. He started seeking new opportunities and looking for potential clients in areas he had never considered before. At first, things weren't easy. Former clients no longer trusted him as they once had, and he had to work extremely hard to rebuild those relationships. However, he didn't give up. Every morning, he woke up early, worked late into the night, and faced failures without losing heart. He knew that only hard work, persistence, and faith could help him recover what had been lost. Lon also took on a part-time job. She didn't want to rely solely on her husband, and despite Ha's attempts to dissuade her from working so hard, she decided to contribute to earning money. She joined an online sales project, helping people find and sell handmade crafts. She also assisted small artisans in promoting their products. The work wasn't easy, but Lon felt she was doing her part to support her husband and help them overcome their challenges together. Gradually, they began to see changes. The difficult decisions started yielding results. Their financial situation began to stabilize, and the debts were slowly paid off. They no longer feared losing their home or business and no longer faced stacks of unpaid bills. A year later, standing in his office, Ha looked at the newly signed contracts and returning clients. He couldn't help but remember the darkest days. But now, he knew that perseverance and the love Lon had shown him were the most important things. One day, Ha and Lon sat together in their living room, where they had shared so many emotions since the start of this difficult journey. They reflected on the road they had traveled. "Lon, I truly don't know how to thank you," Ha said, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I just did what felt right, and so did you. We've overcome everything together, and we'll continue to do so. I believe in you, Ha. I always have." Ha held Lan's hand tightly, a sense of relief washing over his heart. They had conquered the greatest challenge of their lives, and nothing could break the love and trust they shared.